Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and this video is asking whether Robert Mugabe was a Marxist and offering a few other reflections and predictions about the future of Zimbabwe. So, Mugabe led ZANU in its rebellion against the white-dominated government of Zimbabwe, then called Rhodesia. ZANU had its own military wing, ZANLA. Mugabe, he espoused Marxism. It was the 60s, it was an intellectual fad, and almost any radical worth his salt called himself a Marxist. Marxism is a highly fissile movement. There are Maoists and Stalinists and Trotskyists and a few other ists and ites. Which one he is not absolutely clear. He mainly drew succor from the Soviet Union. The rival African nationalist movement, ZAPU, headed by his rival Joshua Nkomo, took aid and comfort from Mao's China. So Mugabe, he may have believed in Marxism, certainly to an extent. However, this was the Cold War. If he was going to be assisted by a superpower, the Soviet Union, in name, then he had to say that he subscribed to the Marxist credo. So the Rhodesian government had insisted it was not a racial war. The black community, being over 90% of the populace, had it been a racial war, they would have easily won. There were obviously some black people on the side of the government. A few black people had the right to vote. There were A-roll and B-roll voters. The right to vote was based on paying a certain amount of property tax and on having completed a certain number of years of schooling. The whites, being a privileged community, virtually all of them qualified for the right to vote, but rather few black people had the franchise. Ian Smith was obliged to extend that a bit. Some people were definitely on the nationalist side, some people on the government side. There were others who were neutral, who were indifferent. He was trying to win over black people who were sitting on the fence to his side, and that met with only limited success. Particularly it was too little, too late, and it was blatant by the late 70s which side was going to come out on top. So arguably what was going on in Zimbabwe was a class war more than a racial war. But Marxists are supposed to reject ethnic distinctions. There's that renowned Marxist book by Perry Anderson, Imagined Communities, saying nations are invented. That's certainly true of Zimbabwe. It's a British creation. There were the Shona and Ndebele people who'd been at daggers drawn for centuries, put together by the British. The Ndebele had been in the driving seat, and the British claimed they were liberating the Shona, and the Shona didn't really see it as salvation. But anyway, why was he seen as a Marxist? Partly because Smith's government was very eager to brand him a Marxist. Don't call the guerrillas nationalists. Almost everyone's a little bit nationalistic, because then the black soldiers will take their side. Call them communists, because they're rather more controversial. A lot of people don't know what that is, think it's sinister or something. So then we obviously know that Mugabe came to office, but in some ways he didn't behave in a Marxist fashion. He did not abolish private property. He did not take into public control the means of distribution, production and exchange. So free enterprise was still permitted. If things had been run for the benefit of the majority, then that might have been in some ways a good thing. And you can see how that can benefit most people. But it was not run for the common weal. Now I know that socialist economies and planned economies can go very badly, but you just see the cacocratic way that he ruled his country, the unexampled inflation that he caused in his country, and actually a Marxist model would have been better. Let me see. Then he joined the non-aligned movement, which is fascinating. He was eager to say that in the run-up to the Lancaster House negotiations, because if he hadn't, if he'd made it clear that he was going to join the Soviet bloc, then the United States and indeed the UK wouldn't have been so keen to help him out. He went on a state visit to the United States early in the 80s to show that he really was neutral, that he was not the Kremlin's man, wasn't anti-Soviet either. Another reason why he wasn't really a Marxist is he wasn't anti-religious. He considered himself to be a true son of the church, and Marxists tend to be outspoken atheists. Another way he didn't turn against the colonial heritage is he didn't reject Christianity, which was brought by British missionaries. And almost nowhere in Africa have people spurned that and returned to animist religions. But he's been race baiting for the last 20 years or so. When things have gone badly for him, he's had to have somebody to scapegoat. It was a failure of leadership, as Mandela said. Mugabe wasn't willing to take responsibility for his gross misrule, so he claimed a handful of elderly whites were a mortal and existential threat to the country, which was preposterous. White mastery was untenable when whites comprised 6% of the population. Certainly not going to rule the country with a 0.2% of the population. As I say, domination by that race was just not practical. We know that because it was tried, and Smith, he said he would never negotiate, he would fight to the death, but even he caved in and negotiated in the end. Interestingly, Nkomo also vowed that he would not parley with Smith. He said this in 1978 after the Rhodesian military made a very effective attack into ZAPU bases in Zambia, killed quite a lot of civilians too. And Nkomo did end up coming to the negotiating table. There's no question that the nationalist side won that war. It was a bit of a face saver for Smith and his coterie. One of the preposterous things that Mugabe continuously saying is he makes a ridiculous accusation that the United Kingdom is behind all these machinations, the UK is trying to control it, which is preposterous. So far as I know, nobody in Zimbabwe wants to become a colony again. Even if Zimbabwe were to offer herself to the UK, the United Kingdom would decline. The UK doesn't want colonies, hasn't wanted them for decades. Since 1965, Her Majesty's government was trying to bring about black majority rule, independence, wash her hands of Zimbabwe, and it was a problem. It was on the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary's desk. He wanted it off his problem. They're very eager to bring about negotiations, and indeed they did. You know, Margaret Thatcher, a right-winger, a cold warrior, even she was most keen to get Mugabe to London for those Lancaster House negotiations in September 1979. So what now? Well, there's the example of Hissène Habré, a former president of an African sovereign state, Chad. Habré was recently given a life imprisonment by the African Court of Human Rights. Would Mugabe face the same? Somehow I doubt. He's maybe not fit to stand trial. He may not be all there, so he could plead incapacity. The trouble is, if it is found that he was incapable of controlling his faculties, then presumably his resignation wouldn't be legally valid either. But I'm not sure how they'd square that legal circle. But as I say, I'm not terribly optimistic with the future. I desperately want to be wrong. It couldn't have got much worse. It might just get slightly better now. That's that. And incidentally, I'm not trying to defend the old system. It was absurd and unfair when people of different races weren't allowed to get married, when only people of one colour could own certain property, and things like that. It's a genuine democracy would be a good thing. The one thing is, in the last couple of years of Ian Smith, Zimbabwe was undemocratic, like almost every other country in Africa, but it was a bit closer to democracy than almost all the others, because the black community had 2/3 of the representation of the parliament, and nobody doubts the votes cast were genuine. There was no ballot rigging or no genuine votes were discounted. On the other hand, the two major parties, ZANU and ZAPU, weren't allowed to participate because they were engaged in an insurgency against the government. We know they're the most popular parties because when there were multi-party elections in '79, including ZANU and ZAPU, they did the best. A bit of cheating from those parties, but not so much as to significantly alter the result. You look at lots of other countries. Mozambique was totalitarian, so was Angola. Zambia was a one-party state, and Malawi, there was an absurd cult of the personality. You'd be sent to prison for 20 years for criticizing the president. So despite all Zimbabwe Rhodesia's flaws, it was closer to democracy than many of the others. However, I don't want to bring back racial distinctions, discriminations. Whites can expect no favours from me. I feel no racial solidarity. I'm not proud that I'm white, nor am I ashamed. I'm indifferent of it. I would just like to see a happier future for all the world. And let's vainly hope that this new president is going to bring that about.